Every small town has its secrets, but in some places, those secrets are darker, deeper, and they refuse to be forgotten. They're whispered in diners, debated in local papers for decades, and become the ghost stories told to scare teenagers on lonely backroads. These aren't just legends. They read the lingering questions left behind when the unthinkable happens in a place where everyone is supposed to know your name. From anonymous letters that held a town in a grip of fear to a man who simply vanished into a chimney, we're about to explore 5 real small-town mysteries that remain unsolved. If you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious kind of stories that get into your head and leave you checking the locks at night, then you've come to the right place. Go ahead and subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss out on our next trip into the unknown. Now, let us head to our first destination. A quiet Ohio town that was torn apart not by a monster in the flesh, but by one that lived in their mailboxes. Circleville, Ohio. The name itself sounds like something from a storybook, a perfectly contained, all-American town. Sitting about 25 miles south of Columbus, it was, back in the 1970s, a community of around 13,000 people. It was the kind of place where families had lived for generations and gossip usually traveled fast but harmlessly. But in 1976, a poison began to seep into the town's bloodstream, delivered in plain white envelopes with a Columbus postmark. It started with a single letter, and then another, and then hundreds. An anonymous author, who would come to be known only as the Circleville Writer, began a campaign of terror that would resurface sporadically for years. The letters were written in a distinct, crude block lettering, and they all carried a simple, terrifying message. I am watching you, and I know your secrets. One of the first targets was Mary Gillespie, a respected driver for the local school district. The letter she received in the summer of 1976 was viciously personal, accusing her of having an affair with a school superintendent. But it went further than just accusations. The writer included chilling threats, claiming to know where she lived and that they were watching her children, warning her that this was no joke. Terrified and embarrassed, Mary initially kept the letters to herself, but the writer was relentless. Soon, her husband, Ron Gillespie, was getting them too. The letters taunted him, demanding he force his wife to admit the truth and inform the school board. If he didn't, the writer threatened to broadcast the accusations on CB radios, posters, and billboards until the truth came out. The writer made good on that threat. Crude, hand-drawn signs began popping up along Mary's bus route, accusing her of infidelity. Soon, the whole town was gripped by fear and paranoia. It wasn't just the Gillespies anymore. Letters were sent to city officials, local businesses, and regular residents, airing dirty laundry, both real and imagined. The writer seemed to have an almost supernatural knowledge of the town's most private affairs. Neighbors started eyeing each other with suspicion. The trust that holds a small town together was dissolving. Who held so much resentment and knew so much? The Gillespies were desperate. But in August of 1977, the mystery took a tragic turn. Ron Gillespie received a phone call. His family said he was furious. He grabbed his pistol, told his children he was going to confront the person he believed was the writer, and sped off in his truck. A short time later, his truck was found crashed into a tree. Ron was dead. The coroner ruled it an accident, noting his blood alcohol level was over the legal limit and that he had fired his gun before the crash, suggesting he may have become enraged and lost control. But his family never believed it. They were convinced the Circleville writer had driven him to his death, or maybe even run him off the road. Years passed. The letters slowed, but never completely stopped. Mary Gillespie did eventually admit to having an affair with the superintendent, though she insisted it only began after the letters started. Then, in February of 1983, Mary saw another one of the crude signs while driving her bus. When she went to pull it down, she discovered it was a booby trap. A string attached to the sign led to a box with a loaded pistol, aimed right at her and rigged to fire. Incredibly, the weapon malfunctioned. Police traced the gun back to one man, Poole, Fressoir Mary's former brother. Fressoir denied everything, claiming his gun had been stolen. But during a contentious divorce, his ex-wife told police she thought he was the writer. Fressoir was arrested and, at his trial, a handwriting expert testified that his writing was a match, He was found guilty of attempted murder and sent to prison. The town breathed a sigh of relief. The monster was behind bars, but he wasn't. While Paul Friseur was in prison, the letters started again. They came from the same Columbus postmark and were written in the same block lettering. Prison officials found it highly unlikely that Friseur could have sent them. His mail was monitored, and he often lacked access to the necessary materials. In a deeply ironic twist, Paul Friseur himself began receiving letters in prison from the writer, taunting him. "Now when are you going to believe you aren't going to get out of there?" One letter sneered. The letters continued. When the TV show Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment on the case in 1994, they reportedly received a postcard shortly after with a chilling message. Something along the lines of, "Forget, sir, Ohio. Don't mention the show again. That Samajir Paul Friseur was released on parole." And just as mysteriously as they began, the letters appeared to stop for good. Friseur maintained his innocence until his death in 2012. So who was this Sarkleville writer? Was it Paul Friseur, who somehow managed an impossible mailing campaign from inside a prison? Or was he just a convenient scapegoat for a police force desperate for an answer? The identity of the person, or people, who held a small Ohio town hostage with paper and ink remains one of America's most bizarre and chilling unsolved mysteries. Section 2. The Jessica Chambers Murder. The town of Cortland, Mississippi, is a tiny speck on the map in Panola County, with a population that barely scrapes 500. It has a place of wide open fields and quiet country roads where not much is supposed to happen. But on the evening of December 6th, 2014, that quiet was shattered by an act of unimaginable horror, a crime so brutal it would draw national attention and leave a permanent scar on this small community. The victim was 19-year-old Jessica Chambers, a former cheerleader. She was, by all accounts, a vibrant, well-liked young woman. But in the months before her death, rumors and later testimonies suggested Jessica might have started associating with a rougher crowd, possibly connected to small-time drug dealing in an area with few opportunities. On that Saturday evening, Jessica told her mother she was going out to clean her car and get something to eat. Surveillance footage from a local convenience store shows her waving to someone, off-camera, around 5:30 p.m. After that, her movements for the next couple of hours become a dark, impenetrable mystery. The next time anyone saw Jessica, it was just after 8 p.m. A driver on the rural Heron Road saw a car engulfed in flames and called 911. When volunteer firefighters arrived, they were met with a scene from a nightmare. It wasn't just the car burning. Staggering towards them out of the darkness was a figure. It was Essa. She was burned over 98% of her body, wearing only her underwear. Despite her horrific injuries, she was alive and able to speak. The first responders, men who were her neighbors, were shaken to their core. In those chaotic, terrifying moments, they asked the one question that mattered. Who did this to you? What Jessica said next would become the most debated piece of evidence in the entire case. Multiple first responders, including the fire chief, reported that she whispered a name, something that sounded like Eric or Derek. She was airlifted to a hospital in Memphis, but her injuries were too severe. Jessica Chambers died a few hours later, taking the full truth of what happened on Heron Road with her. The investigation was immediate and intense. The story of the beautiful cheerleader burned alive captured the nation's attention. Investigators pursued the Eric lead with everything they had, interviewing dozens of men with that name or similar-sounding ones across the county. But the trail went cold. The case stalled for over a year. Then, in February 2016, police announced an arrest. The suspect was not named Eric. He was Quinton Tellis, a man who had known Jessica for a few weeks. The case against him was built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence, primarily cell phone data that seemed to place him with Jessica on the night she died. Prosecutors theorized that after a consensual encounter, Tellis suffocated Jessica, then drove her car to her on road, doused it and her body with an accelerant, and set her ablaze to destroy evidence. Quinton Tellis went to trial in October 2017. The prosecution presented the cell phone data. The defense, however, had a powerful tool: Jessica's own dying words. They argued relentlessly that if Jessica could say a name, she would have said Quinton. She knew him. Why name someone else? The prosecution brought in experts who testified that, with her mouth so severely burned, Jessica would have been physically incapable of clearly enunciating any name. The jury was deadlocked. A mistrial was declared. The district attorney tried Tellis again a year later. The evidence was the same. The arguments were the same. And the result was the same. The second jury also deadlocked, and the judge declared another mistrial. Today, while the state hasn't formally dropped the charges, there are no plans to try Quinton Tellis a third time for Jessica's murder. He remains the primary person of interest, but the case is inactive. The questions still haunt. Cortland, did Jessica really name her killer, only for that lead to go nowhere? Or were her dying words just the misunderstood sounds of a person in unimaginable pain? The community is left with only the horrifying image of a young woman walking out of a fire, her last breaths spent in a mystery that may never be solved. Section 3. The Big Star Murders. Windsor, North Carolina, is a historic town nestled in the state's rural Inner Banks region. It's a place defined by its tight-knit community, where family roots run deep. But on the night of June 6, 1993, a different kind of storm ripped through the heart of this peaceful town, leaving behind a bloody mystery that remains unsolved to this day. The location was the Big Star grocery store, a central hub for the community. 3 of its employees were working late that Sunday night. 52-year-old Grover T. Meeks Jr., the store's well-respected manager. 38-year-old John H. Smith, a dedicated stalker. And 28-year-old James Pokey Hawley Jr., a young man known for his friendly demeanor. Sometime after the store closed, an armed intruder, or possibly more than one, got inside. There were no signs of forced entry. This led investigators to believe the killer might have hidden inside before closing, or maybe was even let in by one of the employees, someone they knew and trusted. What happened next was an act of shocking brutality. The assailant, armed with at least 2 different weapons, executed all 3 men. The crime scene was horrific. While money was taken from the store's safe, the sheer viciousness led many to believe this wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. It felt personal, like an act of rage or revenge. The next morning, when employees arrived to open the store, a wave of shock and terror washed over Windsor. Murders, especially like this, were virtually unheard of. The victims weren't anonymous. They were friends and neighbors. The town was thrown into a state of grief and fear. The investigation, led by local police and the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation (SBI), began immediately. They explored theories ranging from a robbery by outsiders to a personal vendetta. The lack of forced entry remained the most perplexing detail. Did one of the victims have a secret enemy they unwittingly let inside? The use of 2 different firearms also led to speculation about multiple killers. Every question just seemed to lead to more questions. A significant reward was offered for information. The victims' families made repeated, heartbreaking pleas for someone to come forward. But it was as if a wall of silence had gone up around the case. Perhaps, if anyone in town knew something, they were too afraid to talk, terrified of the person responsible for such a brutal crime. Years turned into decades. The Big Star grocery store eventually closed. The town tried to move on, but the memory of that night never faded. For the families of Grover Meeks, John Smith, and James Hawley, there has been no closure. Their loss is compounded by the painful reality that the person responsible may have lived freely among them for over 30 years. The case remains open, a cold file, waiting for the one phone call that might finally bring the truth to light. Section 4. The Boy in the Chimney Woodland Park, Colorado, is known as the city above the clouds, a place people go to be close to nature. It was here that 18-year-old Josh Maddox lived. Described as a free spirit, Josh loved music and often took long walks alone in the surrounding woods. This love for solitary wandering would ultimately become the prelude to one of the most bizarre mysteries the state has ever seen. On the morning of May 8, 2008, Josh told his sister he was going for a walk. It was nothing out of the ordinary, but Josh didn't come home. His family worried he was in distress over the suicide of his older brother 2 years earlier, or had perhaps just run away. His father reported him missing. For 7 long years, there was no sign of Joshua Maddox. It was as if he had walked into the forest and simply vanished. Then, in August 2015, the mystery took a grim and shocking turn. About a mile from the Maddox family home stood an old, abandoned cabin. As a demolition crew began to tear down the building's stone chimney, they made a horrifying discovery. Wedged inside the narrow flue was a human body in a fetal position, wearing only a thermal shirt. The body was mummified. Using dental records, authorities identified the remains as Joshua Maddox. The 7-year search was over, but a flood of disturbing new questions had just begun. How on earth did he get inside a chimney? The Teller County coroner, Al Bourne, conducted an autopsy. He found no signs of trauma, no broken bones, no bullet holes. Toxicology reports came back clean. Baseth Ontisborn ruled the death accidental. The official theory was that Josh tried to enter the cabin by shimmying down the chimney, got stuck, and died of hypothermia. But that explanation never sat right with anyone, especially Joshua's family and the cabin's owner, Chuck Murphy. The theory was full of holes. First, the cabin owner recalled installing a steel mesh or covering over the chimney years earlier, and he believed it would have been difficult for Josh to get past it. Second, a large, heavy piece of furniture had been dragged in front of the fireplace, blocking the opening from the inside. Why try to enter through a chimney if the exit is obstructed? Then there was the most baffling detail of all. The rest of Josh's clothes, his pants, socks, and shoes were found inside the cabin, placed near the fireplace. Why would he take off most of his clothes, leave them inside, and then climb onto the roof to re-enter through the chimney wearing only a shirt? It makes no sense. Chuck Murphy was vocal in his belief that Josh was murdered. He speculated that someone either killed Josh and stuffed his body in the chimney, or trapped him there to die. The family also struggled with the official ruling. The situation doesn't make any sense at all. His sister, Kate, said, "DACA theories have since emerged, including online tips about a local man who allegedly bragged about putting someone in a hole. But no concrete evidence ever surfaced. The cabin is gone now, completely demolished. But the questions remain, hanging heavy in the mountain air. Was Joshua Maddox the victim of a terrible freak accident, or was he the victim of a heinous crime? His body hidden in a place so bizarre that his killer thought he would never be found. The truth, it seems, died in that chimney with him." Section 5. The Gates of Hell on Riverdale Road. For our final mystery, we travel not to a single crime scene, but to a place where decades of dark history and folklore have bled into the very pavement. This is Riverdale Road, an 11-mile stretch of asphalt that winds through the rural landscape between Thornton and Brighton, Colorado. By day, it's a quiet country road, but when the sun goes down, locals will tell you it transforms. They call it one of the most haunted roads in America. Some even call it the Gates of Hell. The mystery of Riverdale Road isn't a hoot. It's a tapestry of legends and ghost stories, each adding to its terrifying reputation. The cornerstone of Riverdale's mythology is the legend of the Madman's Mansion. The tale claims a wealthy man built a grand home along the road, and one day, in a fit of madness, set it on fire, burning his family alive inside. All that remained were the large iron gates at the entrance. In reality, the story is considered pure urban legend. There are no records of the fire, and the exact location is a subject of debate. But those phantom ruins became known as the Gates of Hell, a place where local stories claim satanic cults perform rituals. Visitors have reported seeing ghostly figures and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. But the Madman's family aren't the only spirits said to haunt this road. There's the Phantom Jogger. As the legend goes, a jogger was killed in a hit-and-run years ago. Ever since, drivers have reported chilling encounters, claiming to hear footsteps gaining on them from behind or seeing a shadowy figure in their rearview mirror, only for it to vanish. Then there is the Lady in White. She appears as a spectral figure wandering the shoulder, disappearing the moment anyone stops to help. Other legends speak of a phantom Camaro that tries to lure drivers into a deadly race, and even ghostly handprints of children appearing on car windows supposedly from a tragic school. Bus crash, though. There's no official record of such an event ever happening. Even darker legends, though not supported by historical records, speak of the spirits of slaves hanged from the cottonwood trees. The sheer volume of paranormal claims is staggering. Drivers report headlights flickering, radios changing on their own, and cell phones dying. The feeling of being watched is a common thread in nearly every story. The road has become a hotspot for paranormal investigators and thrill seekers, many of whom claim to have captured evidence of strange lights and disembodied voices. Is Riverdale Road truly a gateway to hell? Or is it a case of collective folklore, where one story snowballs over generations, attracting more legends until the road itself becomes a living horror story? Unlike a police case, there are no files to close here. The mystery is one of atmosphere, of belief, and of the power of a story to transform a simple stretch of pavement into a landmark of fear. It remains one of America's most chilling local legends, a place where the line between reality and nightmare feels terrifyingly thin. From the psychological terror of an anonymous writer to a fiery mystery on a back road. From a brutal triple murder to the impossible death of a boy in a chimney. And finally, to a road that seems to collect ghosts like scars. These stories show us that the deepest secrets are often kept not in bustling cities, but in the quiet corners of the country, where communities are small and memories are long.